Hey, welcome back to another episode of the 938 podcast, coming to you today from the Mission Office here in Springfield, Missouri. We're glad that you're tuning in, joining us today. And my name is Craig Stevenson, and I'm an Associate Mission Director here with the BBFI Mission Office. And excited today because we have Dennis Jennings with us.
Man, I'm glad to be here, Craig.
Yeah,
thanks for the invitation.
Man, great to have you on here. Now, you and I have known each other now, about 5 years?
Something like
give
that.
Give or take. I don't think I'd ever met you before we moved to Springfield.
No, I heard about you a lot when I was working at the Mission Office. John always talked about you even before you came. So I heard about you a long time.
You know, we had, he and I had the privilege of having a lot of conversations. Of course, I was working with the Mission Office at the Missionary Reunion, working with MKs and stuff. And so he and I always had all kinds of conversations. So hopefully everything you heard was good.
All good.
So, well, hey, it's good to have you. So do this, take a minute and go ahead and introduce yourself. Obviously, I already told him your name, but tell us a little about yourself, your family. Tell us, where you pastor, the church you pastor. Tell us a little bit about what you have going on at the church.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here, and I love the BBFI Mission Office. I love the BBFI missions, and I'm so all in with missions that being here, of course, it's almost like coming home a little bit.
Yeah.
I got to work here for, the better part of 4 years. And had a great time. But I'm excited to be where I'm at. I pastored in St. Pete, Florida for 12 years, and now I will be, the last Sunday of August, I'll be 13 years at Cherry Street.
Oh, wow.
And so,
well, congrats on that.
Well,
that's great.
I'm always surprised if somebody comes back the second Sunday. So it's
sure.
It's
no,
cool
I get that.
It's cool that we've enjoyed it. My wife Jana, she is my sweetheart, and we have a great time. We have two boys, Ben and Shad. Ben pastors in Findlay, Ohio. His wife Megan, and three of our grandkids. Shad, his wife Rachel live here in Springfield. Shad is a big part of our media team at church.
Cool.
And we have a granddaughter, Ava, here. And this week, Silas is going to be born. He's
okay.
We're excited about that.
Very cool. Well, congrats on that. So, talk to me about this. And I know we have some things we're going to talk about, but we'll get to that in a minute. But talk to me about what it's like to have your kids in ministry.
Oh, it's the greatest thing ever. But it's always been that way.
Yeah.
We raised our kids not to live in a glass house. PK's got you get no extra rope.
Yeah.
In fact, we just taught them to live by biblical principles, to love Jesus, gave them the opportunity to serve, made them do things when they didn't want to.
Yeah.
But we also discipled them throughout their life. And as they grew up, God blessed. And Ben's in vocational ministry.
Yeah.
He's pastoring in Findlay, as I said. Shad is just as much involved in the ministry.
Absolutely.
And he's making a difference, he and Rachel. Yeah. And so it's exciting.
And thinking about that, obviously you make a great point, because that's the truth. Just because you're not in vocational ministry doesn't mean you're not in ministry.
Exactly.
And the part that he's playing at the church and what's going on there, that's great. And I love hearing stories about pastors' kids. Because I was pastor's kids and missionary kids. I was a missionary kid. And so just love to see other pastor's kids and missionary kids that are involved in ministry, and just love to hear those stories and things like that.
Yeah,
so,
you want to see them have the heart.
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
And I know you guys have heart. You've adopted. I praise the Lord for you guys. I love your testimony, Craig, in that area. And we've got some commonality in that.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking forward to seeing what God's going to do, continue to do as you continue your ministry here at the Mission Office.
Well, I tell you what, I love working here. We have a great team. Obviously, John Connerup does a great job leading our team. And then you just go through and you look at all the different aspects of everyone that works here and everything that everyone brings to the table. Just such a dynamic environment that we're all here to support our missionaries and to support our churches. And so I love the ministry that God has us in here, and get to work with some great people, and thankful for that. So
one of the things I love, and this will kind of probably dovetail into where we're headed, but what I love is that the Mission Office understands its role alongside the local church.
Yeah, sure.
We have we say that we are a fellowship of churches and fellowship of pastors, and but the missionaries are accountable to their sending churches.
Yeah, that's right.
But the missionary enters into a covenant, if
Yeah.
you will. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
use biblical language.
Oh, that's a great term for it. Yeah.
They enter into a covenant
Yeah.
with the mission office, and their sending church
That's
enters
right.
into that covenant
Yeah.
as well. And so what a joy it is as a pastor to have the mission office coming alongside us,
Yeah.
doing what we can't do. I mean,
Sure.
we would be so much lame, I guess is what you say. We would be hindered a lot. We'd
Yeah.
be limping along rather than walking or even running
Yeah.
if it wasn't for what the mission office does for the local church. So it's a wonderful partnership for our local churches, and I appreciate the mission office recognizing the role and being a part to help us accomplish the Great
Yeah,
Commission.
and I think we all love that role, that position, because what happens is churches support us. So some people don't realize how we're funded, right? So a lot of organizations out here, they take a percentage of, and you know this as well as I do, but they take a percentage of missionary support to come back to operating expenses. So we've seen that range from 5%. There's one organization we know that 17% of every dollar that comes in goes to the organization or the office for those administrative fees or whatever you want to term it, their budget, basically.
And that's not wrong.
No,
It's not wrong for that.
Yeah.
But what a joy
Yeah.
to know that it's because of the love of churches for missionaries and missions.
That's right.
That the BBFI doesn't have to do that.
That's right. So when someone supports our missionaries, 100% of that money goes straight to our missionaries, because churches like Cherry Street and churches like, countless, a number of other churches across the country, they support us monthly just like they do missionaries. And that's what allows us to then come alongside and provide the services and support that we're able to do for our churches and our missionaries. And it's really a really cool and really unique process, because you don't see that very often.
Yeah, it's. I think it's some of the best missions money we invest. Every single month. I feel like when we support the mission office, that we are literally supporting all of our missionaries at an even greater level. We support 140.
That's awesome.
Give or take missionaries. We have 20 or 21, or I think it'll be 21 by this time. Is it going to be 21 in September? We're there. We just got a bunch, but I feel like every time we send a check to the mission office, we are sending additional support, additional
the missionaries,
help to our missionaries.
What a great perspective, because that's actually, that's a great perspective, because that's what the truth is. That's what it is, because it's by you guys and other churches donating and giving to us that allows us to provide these other services that so many churches can't provide.
Not possible.
Not possible.
It is not possible for us to do everything that really needs to be done to keep our missionaries on the field long term. And the fellowship, the mission office specifically, comes alongside and even has built the vehicle, so to speak, that every church would have to build individually.
Yeah.
I mean, what a mind-blowing thing it would be for a church to have their first missionary set out and not even have a vehicle in which to send them. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
And this really, we're off of where we were headed, but that's okay. Let's go down this path, because I love this conversation. I think it's good perspective for people that are watching to hear this. So what are some of those things that the mission office does for missionaries that would be a challenge? One of the things that comes to my mind is a medical plan.
Absolutely. We as a sending pastor, long before I became pastor of Cherry Street, I was a sending pastor in St. Petersburg. In fact, Dr. Baird is the one who called me and said, "Hey, I've got a missionary here that you need to help me with." And I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Nice.
But I learned a lot of things.
Sure.
At the same time, I inherited missionaries there in St. Pete that were not BBF missionaries, one in particular who had a lot of medical issues, Craig. A ton. And you know that happens with our missionary families.
Absolutely.
It happens.
Absolutely.
But this particular family was always, we're in trouble. Can you send? We need 1,000. We need 5,000. Can you help us? And I became convinced very early when missionaries would say, well, I don't, when it comes to this whole thing of why should I have to raise support for medical? Well, you should be doing that anyway, whether it comes to the fellowship
whether it comes here or not.
And this, you say, well, but it costs a little more. Or I'm in a country where where they have socialized medicine. I don't need. Let me tell you something. What I've experienced is that the missionaries who have the greatest problems, they don't stay on the field to get those medical problems, they come back here, and then that socialized medicine is not doing them any good at all.
It doesn't cover them.
They need that. And so as a sending pastor, there is great responsibility. In fact, I'll even say it as strongly as this. Okay? I'll say it as strongly as this. Once in a while, we have a missionary. Typically, it's somebody who got themselves into a financial situation for whatever reason.
Okay.
And they say, you know what, I'm paying the X number of hundreds of dollars a month out to the mission office, and I'm living in the socialized medicine country, and so we're going to separate ourselves from the mission office, and because we don't, it's just good stewardship for us. And you know what my response is, and I've talked with our deacons and trustees at Cherry Street about this. It's the same conversation I had in St. Pete, and that is this: you have now changed the covenant that we agreed to before you went out, and we're not willing to take to assume the risk that you are still telling us now, the risk you assume. And so that is one of the rare cases in which Cherry Street will normally drop a missionary. And it's not because, well, they're no longer BBFI. That's not the issue.
That's not the perspective.
It's because the risk that they are putting themselves in is not well thought out.
Because if they get on the field and they get into a medical emergency, where do they go for all of those funds that are needed to get them back to the States or whatever? It's their sending church, and it's all of their supporting churches as well. And so, no, that's a great perspective.
Yeah, so it's a really important thing that the mission office provides that service for our missionaries. I mean, a huge thing for us. Another one is the financial side of things, just the financial accountability is keeping us right in the eyes of the government, the IRS. After 9/11, I mean, I came to the mission office in 2005. And that was just a few years after 9/11. People were really, I mean, there was a heightened awareness of money going outside of the country, especially in different places around the world that were considered to be hotbeds.
That's right.
And so there was a lot of eyes looking down. And so, man, I'm so thankful that the fellowship stays on top of that and makes sure that we are doing things properly and
because that's an ever changing landscape.
It is.
And so for a church to assume financial responsibility on reporting and taxes and all of those things that change, to have someone that's more than a full-time job.
It is, and the truth of the matter is, it's also a highly it's a highly expensive undertaking as well.
That's right.
And I know that because I was involved in redoing all that back in those years, and that was for me. It's a huge piece of the puzzle that I can send the missionaries. The missionaries we send out come through the fellowship, and I'm just telling you, I'm so thankful that those guys have I'd hate to call it a safety net, but it really is a safety net that I don't have to worry about. The confidence I have in Brother John and the whole mission office team is huge to protect. I feel like it protects our missionaries, and it protects our church as well. And so that's a huge piece of the puzzle. Well, and there's so many other things.
There's so many things, but what I love about this conversation is you're really hearing the heart. If you're watching today, you're really seeing the partnership between the mission office and the local church, and that's what it is. We're a local church. I mean, our network is. We're a local church, but then we come alongside, and I love the word you use, in a covenant agreement between the missionary and the church with us, to come alongside and serve in the ways that we're able to because of churches like us. And so it's just a really unique and really cool dynamic.
It is.
Between our churches and our mission office and our missionaries, and it's one that I love having the opportunity to serve in and be a part of. And so, look, if you're just joining us today, we got Dennis Jennings here with us, pastor of Cherry Street Baptist Church. Excited to have him on here on the 938 podcast with us. If you haven't done it yet, click like and subscribe on this video and share this to all of your social media accounts, and we would appreciate it. That'll also allow you to stay up to date on all future episodes of the 938 podcast. And so coming back to Dennis, just talking about that partnership, and there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different things we could talk about. So let's sum all of that up in this one scenario. A missionary calls you, right, and they're wanting to come to Cherry Street, and they say, hey, my name is, I'll just use myself for an example. My name's Craig Stevenson. I'm a missionary to Romania, and I'm a BBFI missionary. What does that communicate to you when you hear that? Just by way of everything that we've talked about, what does that communicate to you just in someone saying that as a missionary?
Well, let me be very, very clear and say that I'm probably a little bit of an odd duck in this.
Okay.
But I go back. I appreciate that when they say it, but I go back even further. I want them to tell me about your local church. Tell me about the sending church, because that's where your authority is. But if they come to me and they tell me that they're a fellowship missionary, then I know some things about them. I know that they have been vetted. I know that if they go to the field, that they're going to be that they're not going to fall through the cracks as far as their finances are concerned, with taxes, with the government, that there's some financial accountability that has to happen, and that as a partner with the mission office, not every sending church is as involved as I would like for them to be. Not every sending pastor is connected to their missionaries. And honestly, having 20, I got calls this morning from 2 of my sent missionaries, and I feel like a terrible pastor when I can't take those calls.
Yeah, sure.
But we have a lot of them. Yeah. And but some don't have as many, or some are not as connected, or some don't understand it. Well, the great thing about the mission office is that the mission office can step in. And I have the confidence if somebody tells me they're BBFI missionary, if I don't know that sending church very well, and I'm still willing to take a chance on the missionary, that I believe that they're somebody that God's going to use. What I know is that if the sending church drops the ball with them, that the mission office is my ally, is my advocate as a supporting church and a supporting pastor, that I can trust the mission office to make sure that missionary is okay, that missionary is well cared for, that missionary is moving in the right direction. That's a huge piece for me because of the church planting, training up of nationals, and at the evangelism part. The whole thing is wrapped up in that covenant agreement under which those people went out. So that's huge for me as a sitting pastor.
No, that's great. And I love your perspective, because a lot of the questions you're answering from the perspective of a sitting pastor, but it's deeper than that. It's not just that, because you were on staff here. Mm-hmm. You worked at the mission office, so you've seen this from every angle, and you understand this on a level that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to come in and see the inner workings and all those details. So I appreciate you being on here today and just kind of giving us your perspective as a sending pastor, as a supporting pastor, and as someone that's a former mission director here. And so I appreciate that, and I'm glad that we were able to have you on today. But let's transition this. Let's move this into a little bit different arena now. So that's all mission office, and that's relationships between the mission office, sending church, and the missionary. Now let's talk about churches. Okay, go back to the idea of the local church, because that's what we are. Very well stated in this conversation and then others throughout the 938 podcast. But let's go back to the local church and the missions program of a local church. Now, obviously, we know Cherry Street has a strong missions program, right? And you guys do a lot of things for missions. You send missionaries out. Matter of fact, a lot of the missionaries that we've had come through the fellowship here lately, a lot of them have been out at Cherry Street. And so I just want to dive into that if we can and dig into that a little bit. And then I also want to look at specifically mission conferences. And I know not everyone does, a mission conference the way that you do. And we were talking about that even before we got on the podcast. We're not going to talk about the specifics of you have to do it this way.
This is not about a right and wrong.
No, we're talking about principles that anybody could take and put in any context of ministry and be successful down this path. And so let me just start off with this. And I know I didn't give you a lot of prep time and a lot of prep on this conversation, but let's just go down this path. So talk to me about the importance of a missions program in a church, and talk to me about the importance of involving your people in that missions program. And let's start there, because that's really one of the foundation pieces of it, is if you have a program and no one's involved, what does that look like? So talk to me about that for just a minute. Well,
first of all, I think that the totality of the church's ministry is summed up in the Great Commission. Yeah. We are to reach people. How many? Jesus said, "Go ye into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature." Acts 1:8. You'll be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, uttermost. I mean, that's our responsibility. Yeah. And so, as a local church, we can't do what God has called us to do without missionaries. Yeah. So first of all, there has to be, I think, before we can even ask an individual person in the pew to be involved in missions, we've got to have a global perspective on the role of our local church.
Yeah.
It's not an option for me to have missionaries.
Yeah.
I say it just about every mission conference we have. We don't have an option as to whether we're involved in missions. We can't be who God's called us to be. We can't be the church God has called us to be without having a perspective that goes beyond our city, our state, our country.
Yeah, sure.
We can't.
No.
So we have to embrace the Great Commission and the global side, the beyond, to use your terms, beyond borders.
Sure.
We have to get beyond our own local church. If we don't do that, then if we're not careful, the next step is a country club.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't want to be that.
No.
That's not what God's called us to do.
Yeah.
So that's a huge part of it. Secondly, I think that...
And that starts with the leader. That starts with the pastor.
Without question.
Because if the pastor doesn't own that,
Without
then
question.
the church isn't going to own that.
Yep.
And so just make that observation in here.
And the truth of the matter is, a lot of churches have, and I think this is great. I've had guys serve in this role. I don't have it right now, but I've had guys serve in the role as a missions pastor.
Yeah.
Typically, I actually use an intern to serve in that role because it helps them a lot.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But this is the first time in, probably the last 10 years that right in the immediate now and now, we don't have an intern. Expecting to have one on staff here in the next month and a half, 2 months.
Awesome.
But this is a little bit of an interim period. But the missions pastor is not the one who's going to cast the vision for that.
Sure.
It is the pastor of the church that's going to own it. And I believe we own it. You hear a lot about mission. Well, you can't be on mission without missions.
Yeah.
I just don't believe you can do it.
Yeah.
So I think it starts there.
Right.
And if it starts there, then the preaching is going to be impacted by that.
Yeah.
There's going to be a passion for lost people in our local area.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at how many missionary candidates that I talk to and missionaries that I call and ask the question, tell me about the last person you talked to about Jesus.
Yeah.
Tell me about the last person you won to Christ.
Yeah, sure.
Tell me, when were you in somebody's home recently? Tell me about how you have you won somebody and you've discipled somebody.
Yeah.
So that has to be not only a Great Commission perspective, but we've got to bring it into the fabric of what our church is.
The very DNA of everything that you do.
Yeah. So when we do that, then I think the next step to get it into the lives and the hearts of our people is this mission conference that we have. That's one. And then secondly, we have to have missionaries and missions emphasis, missions trips, different things that we do in order to give our people the opportunity to participate. Our Vacation Bible School always has a missions side to it.
Yeah.
Our camps always have a mission side to it. Even if the camp speaker doesn't do that, we talk to our kids about those things. Surrender.
Yeah.
There's a formula. In my mind, there's a formula for everything.
Yeah.
Camp is about salvation. It's about a right walk with Christ, and then it's about surrender. So that's the three parts of a camp. If you don't do those three things at camp, and you just about have to do it in that order, but you want to get you want to get kids there. Well, missions is the same. Missions is the same. If we can't just write a check to Chelsea and Levi that you had on the last podcast who go into South Sudan. We actually have to put feet to that Great Commission where we are. If we do that where we are, I'm telling you, it's a lot easier for people to take the next step to empower people to go beyond, because they already have a heart for those beyond the doors and the walls of their church.
Oh, yeah, and I love that. And it all starts with the right perspective, right? It all starts with the Great Commission perspective of go and preach and teach and reach people and disciple them. I mean, that entire process has got to play out. And if you have that perspective, that filters down to missions, which filters down to everything else within the local church. And I love that perspective. So let's dig in a little bit on some of these things. So let's talk specifically about a mission conference, because you talk about how that's kind of a key moment for the church.
For sure.
For Cherry Street. We'll talk Cherry Street specifically for this. So why is it so important? We already talked a little bit about why, but if there's anything else you have on why it's important, and then how does that play out in the life of your church on an annual basis? What does that look like?
Here's an interesting thing. Okay, you mentioned Cherry Street, And I still get calls. I've been pastor at Cherry Street for almost 13 years, and I still get calls. Hey, Dennis, what's it like to pastor in Springfield? You know, and honestly,
I think that's a topic for a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, well,
but go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
My answer is always the same.
Yeah.
It's no different than pastoring in St. Pete. I still have the same commission. I'm still dealing with people. There's as many lost people here as any place I know.
Absolutely.
And so we just embrace the Great Commission locally and globally. That's our responsibility. And so it's the same. I know. And let me just throw one more little piece of this.
Yeah.
There's some who have made the comment to others, and it comes back to me, and some have even said it to me. Well, of course you live in Springfield, so you got these people that are already surrendered to missions, to missions, and so you're just taking on other people's deal. And I look back on that. We have had a couple of circumstances where there were missionaries who, for whatever reason, one sending church closed down, and they needed a sending church. We got one of our great veteran missionaries that we're the sending church for simply because of that circumstance. So we agreed to help out with them, and happily so.
Sure.
But the people that we're sending out from Cherry Street are people who, one or both, were called out of our mission conferences, and when I say called out of the mission conference, that may fester over 2 conferences, or three conferences.
Sure.
It is, but it is such an important thing that we do, because it's the time of the year where we kind of pull the curtains around everything else, and we're not focusing on anything else. We're looking at the need around the world. And we also assume that in every conference, and this plays out all the way through to the receiving of the offering, but we assume in every conference that we have people that are sitting there who've never heard of it before. Our Faith Promise card even asks, is this your first Faith Promise commitment? And boy, it's amazing every year how many we have that are making their very first Faith Promise commitment. That's a big deal. And so I believe we have to assume that there are people who are hearing it for the first time, or who are ready to hear it for the first time. They may have been around a long time. But we have people who come to our conferences who may have been a part of Cherry Street 4, 5, 6, 7 years. But the only thing they get is Sunday morning. And for whatever reason, God's got them at a place. He's got their attention, and now they're coming faithfully. I could give you story after story after story like that.
Well, I've been involved in conferences for a long time, whether I was on deputation going to Romania with my parents or by myself as a single missionary, and then hearing from all of our missionaries that are out there now, on the road and going to conferences and things, because we hear things all the time. But also in the churches that I've had the privilege of being a part of, you talk about assuming that someone's there that's never heard. Another thing that I've always tried to assume, or at least think through and pray for, is that there's someone in this conference right now, someone in this missions emphasis right now, who God wants to call to go to the mission field. And so in that environment, it's all prayers turn that way.
Oh yeah, well that's exactly right. I became a senior pastor on the last Sunday of December of 1990. My first wife passed away on Mother's Day 6 months later, and the fall of that year, and I could tell you a story about what God did, but it wasn't the fall. It would have been the February meeting of the BBFI was in Jacksonville at First Coast. And I heard Lauren McAllister, who was a mission director at the office. So this is inside of about 1 year that I've been a pastor. And Lauren preached a message. Now, I had already scheduled our very first mission conference to happen at the end of February. This was the second week of February. And Lauren preached a message on the church at Antioch. And talked about being a sending church. And I mean, it was the greatest. I later had Lauren come and preach it in St. Pete. I've had him preach it at Cherry Street, because that message really set my soul on fire about what a church's responsibility is about being a sending church. And Lauren, God used him in such a huge way that it was in that conference a couple of weeks later that I introduced the concept of being a sending church. Now, I'd only been a pastor for
not long.
Just a little over a year. I was a widower with 2 little boys at that time. Our church was so small I'm telling you, we may have been 60, 70 people, 75 people at that point.
Yeah.
And yet I so believed the truth that Lauren preached.
Yeah.
In that message, and I talked to him about it later. I called him at the mission office. He became very aware of me in that early time because I was making those calls.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But in February at that conference, I introduced the concept. I said, folks, here's the deal. Park Street Baptist Church has never sent out a missionary as far as I'm aware. I did the research. As far as I knew, they were supporting great missionaries.
Yeah.
But had never sent anybody out. And so, folks, I believe that God wants our church to be a sending missionary. To be a sending church for a missionary. And here's what I will tell you. The Lord answered that prayer. And Richie and Missy got saved at Park Street, I should say. And Richie got saved in the front seat of my pickup truck.
Wow.
And they were the first missionaries that we prayed for. They weren't even saved when we started praying for them. But we had, I'm telling you, I could tell you about people like Donald and Jerry Sangster and Bill and Thelma Sutton and people who were praying people, godly people who loved Jesus and would take the Lord at his word and then grab a hold of him.
Yeah.
And they prayed for all those years. So 4, 5, 6, 8, 10. Richie didn't get saved until 2001.
Wow.
And so that church prayed for the better part of 9, 10 years. And then God answered that prayer.
Wow.
And God called missionaries out of that church.
Man.
The unique situation is, I get to be their sending church now.
Oh, I love that. And let me tell you a few things that I love about that story that you just told. Number one, a lot of times we hear truth in messages or in whatever environment that we listen to, podcasts or whatever. And we think, man, that is great stuff for everybody else but me and my situation. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, we all live there on some level, right? It's all good to talk about being a sending church. But what I love about this is one thing that anyone can do, it doesn't require anything but time, is pray. And it doesn't matter how big your church is or how small your church is. Here's a church, you said you were running 60, 70 in that ballpark, right? That you guys started praying, and look where it led. And I'm a firm believer that God has given us the Great Commission, and that is our job as a church and as believers to go out and reach the world. And if he's given that, then he'll equip us to do that. And a lot of that equipping comes through prayer, and it comes through just there's something about when we pray that it aligns our heart with the heart of God.
No question about it.
And when that happens, oh my goodness, anyone can do it. It doesn't matter what size church you are. God can equip you to accomplish the Great Commission that he's called you to.
That's why the 938 project is so important.
Yes.
It's so important.
I love it.
I'm excited about it. I'm excited. We're getting ready to really launch all the things headed into our conference, which is the last or the third full week or the last full week of September. And we're doing all kinds of things to get ready for that. But I am telling you that when a church prays, when that's the heart, and a church prays, God's the one who saves. Yeah. God's the one who calls.
Absolutely.
God's the one who provides.
Yeah.
You know, God is the one who provides as well. Yeah. And so a lot of over the years, I've gotten phone calls. I got one from a pastor who just had one of their missionaries approved this last May, and he and I talked at length about how to do the things you do to get your missionary prepped and ready to go. And we had a great conversation. It's a pastor that I love and I appreciate his ministry. But this guy's a praying guy. Yeah. This guy's got a heart. And I love it when somebody says, we're sending out our first one. We're sending out our first one. Man, what a joy. But every mission conference needs to be a praying, Lord of the harvest, would you send forth laborers?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And another thing, just tag off what you say. You say he's the one that provides the increase. We know that. We see that in Scripture. Very clear, right? Anything that's not him providing it is manipulation on our part.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're not into that. We want God to work in people's lives and God to bring change in people's lives so they can follow him, not us, right? That's the whole point. And that's why I love Matthew 9:38, right? What does it say? Pray the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into his harvest. Yep. His harvest, his field, his world. We're just simply using the resources that he's provided us as a way of then taking his message to the world around us working for him in his harvest.
Without
and
question.
I love it. I love that.
One of the most impactful stories that kind of piggybacks on that to me that I heard was from one of the missionaries that I inherited in Florida.
Yeah.
But without taking the time to tell the whole thing, it's a great story for a mission conference sometime. But essentially, a missionary was in another country around the world, halfway around the world, in a village where a man who did not speak his language, the missionary was trying to learn the language. He could read it, but he couldn't really conversationally speak it.
Yeah.
He was with another missionary, and he went into this village, and the man that was there who was already saved said, "We've been waiting on you to come."
Yeah.
And he thought that the people in the village had told the missionaries where the man lived, and so and that the missionaries were coming. So he thought, okay, the guy's excited. Long and the short of it is, they got to this missionary and the missionary who's with, who was very fluent in the language. When they got ready to leave, after that the man's wife and kids had been prayed. He told the old man told the story that it was when he was a teenager that a man had come through their village and won him to Jesus.
Yeah.
And he wanted him to stay and talk to the rest of his family.
Yeah.
And he said, "I can't, but if you'll pray, God will send somebody to come." And so these missionaries, when they answered that prayer, well, they found out that had been 30-some years earlier.
Yeah.
And the long and the short of it, they didn't get very far out of that village before the missionary stopped and looked at the guy who was struggling with the language, and he said to him this. He said, "Let me ask you something. When were you called to be a missionary?"
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, I was called at a camp down in Florida."
Wow.
I was saved in my church, but I was called to be a missionary. And they did the math.
Yeah.
And God reached halfway around the world for a young man's prayers who wanted to see the rest of his family saved. And he answered it by calling a little 12-year-old boy in a youth camp. And it took him all those years to put that together. And God did all that. And this is my take on it. That's a big deal to us. That's not a big deal for God. He does it all the time.
Yeah, he does it, and that's just one story of one after another, after another,
all the time,
after another,
all the time.
And we could talk days on stories.
And so that's the reason the Lord says, pray.
Yeah.
The Lord of hosts, that He would send forth. It literally means thrust forth these laborers into His harvest. That's a powerful part of, and if your mission conference is not bathed in that, if your missions program isn't bathed in that from the beginning, then I hate to use the term doomed. It's not doomed, but I'm telling you, it will be
a struggle.
It will be less potent than it could be if indeed you can get folks praying and believing that God is involved.
Yeah.
God is involved.
And let me tell you something else I love about this conversation. We told you at the beginning, if you're just tuning in and you're interested in Project 938, first of all, I'll tell you to go to project938.world, and you can register your church there. I want to encourage you to do so, because the Mission Office, we're putting out a ton of resources this year, all geared towards Project 938 and 938 Sunday. That is Sunday, October 3rd of 2021. So I want to encourage you to go register. And when you register, you're going to get a link to go download all kinds of resources, and then more resources are coming out in this month, maybe even this week or so, here in July. And then also in September is going to be a final release of all kinds of resources. And in that, I'm excited about this, and we don't even have time to unpack this, but we have a full-length documentary on the life of Marjorie Browning, one of our single lady missionaries that spent her life in Brazil, and excited about that. So you're going to want to get registered, project938.world. Go and get registered. But one of the things I love is we're talking about prayer, and we're talking about the right perspective, and we're talking about the way that we approach missions conferences and missions program. Is that has nothing to do with philosophical anything. That has nothing to do with whether you prefer to do this in a 1 week or a month of Sundays, or you want to have a Sunday here and a Sunday there. Has nothing to do with the way it has to be done, because you and I were talking about this. And I love your heart when we were talking before the podcast about how you did this different in St. Pete than you do here in Springfield. Mm-hmm. And it's important, I think, for people to hear and understand that. So when you hear things from us on the podcast and from other people, just take it as, hey, where can I grab principles and
Yeah,
what can I use? Because that's ultimately what it is.
You got to find out what's going to work best and connect best for you personally. First of all, preacher, if you're a preacher listening to this, you've got to have such a grasp on this yourself, and it's got to become a fabric of who you are, I believe.
Yeah.
And secondly, then you understand your culture. We are missionaries.
Yeah.
Every pastor's a missionary to a place.
Yeah.
We've got to do the things that embrace our own culture and impact our culture. We have to do that.
I love that. I had a great conversation actually with some college students the other day, and I said, what would happen in America if every pastor of American churches approached the ministry in their churches like a missionary does on the foreign field? I mean, identifying, you talk about working the culture and all that. And I know a lot of churches do. Some of it's not as intentional, maybe, in some places, in some regards. But I think about a missionary, the planning and the execution of what they have to go out and do to be purposeful about building relationships with people that have no idea who Jesus is. And I think bringing that perspective back to pastor, I love the fact that you say, hey, we are missionaries. That's what we do. It's who we are.
And we have to make the gospel, what's the word I'm looking for? Appetizing to the people that we are, and not by changing it, but by how we present it. And then we've got to help them accept the responsibility. Yeah. But we also have to help them all understand, as we understand, that this is not on my back. Let me just throw one thing that's related, but we may be a little bit down the road.
That's okay.
When I became pastor at Cherry Street, we had, I believe, 8 or 9. The Gilmings, Dr. Gilming, Kenny Gilming, Keith just has, he's just turned over Lighthouse. I mean, those are some of the greatest people on the planet. They've all impacted my life. We are standing on their shoulders. I mean, when I became the pastor at Cherry Street, we already had great missionaries. We had a good missionary program.
Yeah. Can I just say this about the Gilmings? And sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I don't know Dr. Gilming as much. I know Keith just from being around the mission office. And I'll tell you what, there is not a nicer person that
Except Becky.
Becky,
his wife Becky.
I don't know her that well. So,
I'm
but
just
as far
telling
as
you, Keith's a bum without Becky.
Well, there you go. She keeps him in check. There you
love
go.
Them. I mean, they are
the
sweetest, kindest people.
And I tell you what, I love his heart for people and for ministry, and I love their connections to the mission office and the support that they give missionaries and the things that they've been involved with for years. And if that is a reflection of their family, I thank God for families like that.
Amen.
Well, and for how God's used them.
I've said it many times. If I was ever going to get a heart transplant, I would want probably either Keith's or Kenny's, because they're so unique.
Yes.
In both, I mean, they are twins.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I love them both, and they both have impacted my life. And I get the privilege of standing on the impact of that family. I mean, that family, those kids, they were little kids that grew up with Dr. and Mrs. Gilming, with BBC. I mean, all those things. And so I want to say carefully today that Cherry Street is about what the Gilmings did, but really it's about what God did through them.
Oh yeah, sure.
And God's ministry continues. And I mean, this may be my last day on this earth.
Sure.
I don't know.
Who
God
knows?
may take me home today, but God's the one who is involved in all these things.
Oh yeah.
And Craig, when I took that responsibility and we began to have, we instituted some missionary things.
Yeah.
We emphasized some things a little bit differently. We took on some additional responsibilities related to our missions program.
Yeah.
At our church, we just changed out a few things along the way, just trying to pick things up.
Yeah, sure.
And we began to see God. We started praying. We began to see God work and bless. And there were people who God called. Yeah. People who, they're people. We had people who had come to BBC, graduated, and were living in Springfield, selling insurance, doing different things. But God had called, and so we started having one or two. And I'm looking at our missions budget, saying, Lord, I don't know how. I mean, we weren't supporting people much, but we didn't have the income.
Yeah, sure.
Where are we going to get we support our sent missionaries somewhere in around $500 a month. I don't know exactly, but we're close to that.
Yeah.
And but we weren't there then. We were $100 or whatever it was. I don't even remember. What I do remember is that initially, even though I know God is the author of all of it, that He is the one who saves, He's the one who calls, He's the one who sends, and He's the one who supplies.
Yeah.
I know all of that.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that my flesh started looking and going, oh, my goodness, we got these people being called.
Yeah.
They want to go out of Cherry Street.
Yeah.
How can we equip them? Now, there's a lot that we sent back to their churches. And so I said, look, you need to you will make a bigger impact for that church.
Yeah, sure.
And we worked with pastors and helped them send out their first missionaries that way through that. But there are some who were a part of the fabric of Cherry Street, and as those numbers began to go up, it's like, oh my goodness. But it's God's the one who supplies.
Yes.
God is the one who supplies. And now, I don't worry about it. God has shown Himself strong, and He's shown Himself faithful. And when the missionaries call and say, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking," and I want to go, I do my best to talk them out of it. Yeah. And this is not for you. I don't think you're going to make it. I do what I can to discourage. If I can discourage them, they shouldn't go.
Yeah, sure.
Because there's going to be a lot more coming along than me.
Guarantee you. Yeah.
But what I know is that God supplies over and over and over again, and I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
But so a lot of churches get afraid because they're afraid of the financial commitment of sending missionaries. But what the conference does is it gives that time. I think I said it before, where you close off everything else. You put curtains on everything, and you focus on this one thing, and that is our responsibility with the gospel, our stewardship of the gospel, not just in our local area. Because if we don't have that going on, then we've got to get that first. But that doesn't mean that has to be in its full adulthood. Sure. It doesn't mean it's got to be everything it needs to be before we have a mission program, but it just means that we've got to be, I love the way Lindsay Sladen always says it, it's always got to be across the street and around the world. Across the street and around the world. Yep. That's what it's all about. And those things are things that can happen in a church that embraces a great mission conference.
And when I think mission conference, so going back to when I was on staff at Edgewood Baptist Church, Rock Island, Illinois, Mel Brown.
Great pastor.
I consider him my pastor, my mentor. He and I talk all the time. We're working on a couple of books right now together, and I just love that relationship. But one of the things he instilled in me in ministry was, look, there are really 3 major events that are built into a church ministry calendar, right? Easter, back to school, Christmas, right? And then you have missions conferences, the 4th, right? Missions, whatever you call that, And so as evangelism pastor, working through evangelistic training and all that kind of stuff at Edgewood, along with being a youth pastor, one of the things that I really gained perspective on, I'm not the first and I'm not the expert in this by any means, is, we say evangelism is everything. You should always go out and share. You should always do that. And that's absolutely true. Just like you should always give to missions. But there's a difference in just saying that versus, hey, 8 weeks from now is Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday, that is the number 1 day of the year for lost people to come to church. You have 8 weeks. We're going to give you some training. We want you to go out here for 6 or 8 weeks and put that into practice leading into that conference, because you have a deadline and you have an event that you can center that urgency around. And for me, when it comes to missions, that's the benefit in many ways you have with this. It allows you to create a sense of urgency because there's a deadline. There is an event. Now, that event obviously carries over, and it's not exactly the same. But knowing that you have an event, knowing you can focus, like you're talking about, all your people into one event that's coming, it does a ton of good for people to have that perspective to say, hey, I need to really evaluate where I'm at personally leading into this event so God can use me and God can show me what He wants me to see out of that. And so I appreciate that perspective, and I love that that whole philosophy of ministry when you start talking down that path.
Yeah.
So
how's our time doing?
Actually, we are not long off needing to pop out.
Okay.
But let's do one. Go ahead.
Let me give you. Let me just throw 2 or 3 things on this
go
really
for it.
quick.
Yeah.
Okay. So because we're talking about mission conferences, I think there's a couple of things that I will tell you that work great for me and the principles behind them. One is that if you're going to have a great conference, I think that you've got to do 3 things, and I talk to my guest speakers. I've got Paul Monroe coming. He's a great missions preacher. He's a great missions pastor. But Paul and I have talked about it. We want to talk, if you're going to have a great mission conference, the first thing you got to do is establish the need.
Yeah.
That the need is that people are lost around the world. Then you've got to establish the remedy, that Jesus Christ is the only way. And you got to deal with questions like, what about those who've never heard? I mean, those are the questions you have to answer for anybody who's got a half inch of brain.
Yeah.
They're gonna deal with that.
Sure.
And then the third thing you got to do is you've got to help people see individually what their part can be, and that is to pray, give, or go. Those are the 3 things. For us, I try to get my speaker. I have a conference different than we did in St. Pete, but at Cherry Street, our conference starts on a Sunday morning. We go Sunday morning, Sunday night, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. My time in the mission office helped me to see how many people, if I have a Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, or any evening thing, that I'm giving up a third to a half of my crowd who don't come back to those other services. Yeah. So we said, okay, then we're gonna take our conference. Then it doesn't end on Wednesday night; it's going to go to the next Sunday. Yeah. And I preach that Sunday. Yeah. And that's the Sunday that we receive the Faith Promise commitments. Cards, yeah. And one of the things that I try to do every year is to help people understand that we have people in the conference who are from the beginning, this is the first time they've ever heard, all the way to people who've been giving. Yeah. And so we talk about people identifying where they are. Some people give out of their abundance. Yeah. Okay, and that means if they've got it on Sunday and they want to give 10, 20, some give 100, some give $1,000 out of their abundance to missions. Yeah. Praise God for people who are motivated to give out of their abundance. Then there are people who give out of their budget. They say, wait a minute, I believe that we can do more. They hear. They listen they get under the burden, and they say, well, you know what? Out of our budget, we can adjust this, we can adjust that, and we can give more consistently than just out of our abundance, and we can do more because we see the need. Yeah. I praise God for people who move like from abundance into the budget kind of giving. And then there are people who have been practicing the budget kind of giving, or some who maybe are just hearing it for the first time, but they think I can sacrifice. Yeah. So they move into the issue of sacrifice. Sacrifice means that it's going to cost me something that I'm going to have to do without in another area in order to make this happen. And I'm always grateful and thankful when somebody moves from abundance to budget to sacrifice. But then there is that group of people that will enter into that realm of faith, and they will say, you know what? I recognize that God is the supplier of everything. Yes. And here's what we got to be careful in our churches. Don't teach prosperity gospel. Yeah, absolutely. And don't just teach 2 Corinthians 8. You got to get to chapter 9 where it says God is able to do exceeding abundantly. I mean, he's the one who's going to provide for every good work. Yeah. He's the one that's going to do it. And so you want those people to say, by faith, I believe that God through me can provide, and as he provides, I will give. And that is a biblical principle, the grace giving. And when we teach it, we don't borrow from the prosperity theology, guys, and we're not trying to get people to make an emotional decision. Absolutely. But we move people, and we recognize that God will use people who are giving out of their abundance, out of their budget, out of sacrifice, and out of faith. And because you got all that in the church. All of it. All of it. And so what we want to see is God moving people in the process. Yeah. We don't ever set a monetary goal. Yeah. What we're looking for is for increase in faith of God's people. We're looking for new givers. That's why on our card, it's a place for them to mark, this is my first time gift, or this is an increase. Yeah. This is an increase. I really like for them to mark if this is an increase. Now, they don't put their name on our card, obviously. Yeah. But those are things that really help. And what we've seen is God provide in a great way. I do the card because I understand our people and I understand the culture. Used to try to have somebody else to do it, but I do it, and that is kind of the bones of our conference. So I just want to throw that out there.
Well, and that gives good practical advice and help to someone out here that's trying to figure out, hey, how do I even do this? What does this even look like? That gives them the whole concept right there in what they need to accomplish in whatever methods they want to use.
Sure.
And I love that. And the other thing that I love, and go back to the beginning of our conversation, then we're going to wrap things up, is as churches are faithful in their missions program, they can have confidence that there's a mission office here that is ready and able and competent and ready and on every level to help support, partner with as they send their missionaries out, and they can have confidence that their missionaries are taken care of in that covenant agreement that they all come into.
Absolutely.
So, listen, if you're joining us on the 938 podcast, number one, thanks for coming and thanks for being here today. It's been a privilege to have Dennis Jennings here, pastor of Cherry Street Baptist Church here in Springfield, talking about missions programs, mission conferences, and the partnership between churches and the mission office. And so it's been great to have him on here today. Click like and subscribe on this video, and we would appreciate that. Dennis, anything else that you'd like to say before we get out of here?
I just appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today, Craig. I appreciate what you do and what the mission office does.
Well, appreciate our churches that give so that we can be here and do the things that we do for our churches and missionaries. So, hey, listen, have a great day, and we will see you here next week on the 938 podcast, Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock. See you then.